I stood in the center of our kitchen, my heart racing with a mixture of pride and nerves that felt like static under my skin. On the counter sat 12 jars of my very first batch of handmade candles, the labels hand-stamped with the name Aura Vibe Scents. I had poured my soul into these, experimenting with sustainable soy wax and essential oils for months after my long shifts at the office. When my husband, Julian, walked in, I beamed, holding one out to him like it was a trophy. I expected a hug, or at least a simple nod of acknowledgement for the weeks of late nights. Instead, he stared at the jar for a second and then burst into a loud, mocking laugh that echoed off the cabinets and pierced my confidence. "You've got to be kidding me, Clara," he gasped, clutching his stomach as if I'd just performed a comedy routine. "You really think anyone is going to pay actual money for this? It smells like cheap, industrial soap from a gas station bathroom." My smile didn't just fade, it shattered into a million pieces. The emotional weight of his cruelty felt like a physical blow to my chest. He walked away, still chuckling and shaking his head, leaving me standing in the wreckage of my own excitement. I felt small, humiliated, and utterly alone. But then, my phone vibrated on the granite. I looked down and saw an email notification for an order of 50 units from a corporate firm. The next morning, the sting of Julian's laughter was still fresh, but the notification on my phone was a quiet shield I kept close to my chest. However, Julian wasn't finished with his campaign to diminish me. He emerged from the bedroom with a smirk already plastered on his face, clearly enjoying his perceived superiority. "Good morning, CEO of the kitchen," he drawled, his voice dripping with a sarcasm that made my skin crawl with irritation. He took great pleasure in texting his group chat, and I could hear the pings of their replies as they joined in on his jokes about my little wax hobby. Every time I tried to mention the work I needed to do, he'd roll his eyes and tell me to make sure the floor was mopped before I started playing scientist again. I hid the hurt behind a mask of indifference, waiting until he went to his high-paying job to start my real work. I stayed up late every single night after my own 8-hour shift, melting wax until my fingers were red and my back screamed in protest. I kept the corporate order a secret, fearing he would find a way to believe that too. One evening, Julian came home looking irritated. He tossed his keys on the counter and stared at me. "One of my coworkers, Simon, just asked me where he can buy those candles everyone is talking about online. Please tell me you aren't actually running a scam on people." I didn't answer Julian's jab about being a scammer. I simply went back to my workstation. "Julian, while you were busy downplaying my efforts to anyone who would listen, the internet was doing the opposite. A viral TikTok review from a major home decor influencer had sent a tidal wave of traffic to my tiny website. My phone was chiming so constantly with sales notifications that I had to put it on silent just to focus on the pouring process. The 50-unit corporate order was just the beginning of a massive surge. That afternoon, I received an inquiry from a local luxury boutique called the Velvet Petal. They wanted a bulk order of 500 units for their spring launch. I felt a surge of adrenaline that wiped away the exhaustion. When Julian saw me frantically ordering more bulk wax and glass jars, he didn't ask how I was doing. He just scoured the kitchen for a place to put his beer, clearly announced by my presence. "You're making a mess of the house with all this clutter, Clara," he complained, stepping over a box of wicks. I told him about the 500-unit order, hoping for a shred of validation. He just scoffed, leaning against the fridge with a condescending grin. 500? Good luck with that. Just try not to burn the house down while I'm at the gym. I'd hate for my insurance premiums to go up because of your craft fair delusions." The next 2 weeks were a blur of wax, steam, and very little sleep. I fulfilled the boutique order by working through the night, fueled by caffeine and the burning desire to prove Julian wrong. My hands were blistered from the heat, and my house smelled permanently of bergamot and cedar, but I felt more alive than I had in years of corporate drudgery. I delivered the 500 candles personally, and the owner of the Velvet Petal was so impressed she paid me on the spot, praising the aesthetic. A few days later, the boutique posted a series of high-end photos on their Instagram, showcasing my candles in a stunning display. They tagged Aura Vibe Scents and praised the sophisticated, complex fragrance profile. I watched the comments section fill with praise from thousands of followers. People were calling the scents heavenly and high-end. My heart hammered against my ribs as I scrolled through the notifications, realizing I had tapped into something big. Then I saw it, a direct message that stood out among the rest. It wasn't just a customer. It was a verified account for a major national home goods chain with stores in every state. The message read, "Your brand has a unique aesthetic that fits our upcoming collection perfectly. We'd love to discuss a wholesale contract." I sat on the floor of my messy kitchen and cried tears of pure, unadulterated relief. The message from the national chain was the pivot point I had been praying for. They wanted to schedule a formal call to discuss a partnership that could change my life forever. I looked around the kitchen, which was now overflowing with supplies, and realized I couldn't keep doing this under Julian's nose. He was still in the dark, still believing I was just wasting a few $100s on a phase. I decided to stay silent about the national chain. I knew if I told him now, he would either laugh it off or try to take over the conversation to protect me from being cheated. The stakes were too high to let his ego interfere with my professional growth. During the initial call, the lead buyer was incredibly professional. They didn't treat me like a housewife with a hobby. They treated me like a legitimate business owner. They asked for a formal invoice for an initial trial run of 2,000 candles to be distributed across 20 key locations. As I agreed to the terms, a cold realization hit me. I had been taking payments through a simple personal app. To handle a contract this large, I needed real infrastructure. I realized I didn't even have a dedicated business bank account or a legal entity to protect myself. If this went south, Julian could claim it was a joint asset. I had to move fast and in total secrecy. The very next day, I took a half day from my job and went to a bank across town, one Julian didn't use. I filed the paperwork for Aura Vibe Sense LLC, ensuring that I was the sole proprietor and 100% owner. I opened a separate business account, depositing the remaining cash I had from the boutique sale to get it started. When I got home, I tucked the new paperwork into a hidden folder in my desk. However, Julian was already home early, and he was in a foul mood. He had been snooping through the mail and found a stray letter from the state regarding my tax ID. "You really think you need an LLC for your little hobby, Clara?" he sneered, tossing the envelope onto the coffee table. "You're wasting money on filing fees for a business that won't exist in 6 months. It's embarrassing how hard you're trying to play, boss lady." I didn't engage with his toxicity. I just picked up the envelope and walked to my office, locking the door behind me. I sat at my computer, my heart thumping against my ribs. I opened my professional invoicing software and drafted my very first official bill to the national chain. I typed in the quantities and the agreed-upon price. That same night, while Julian was in the living room making fun of me to his brother over the phone, I hit send on a professional invoice for $42,000. A week passed, and the tension in the house was thick enough to cut. Julian was becoming increasingly agitated by the logistical reality of my business. 2 massive pallets of high-grade soy wax were delivered to the driveway, followed by several crates of custom-designed glass vessels. He spent the entire evening muttering under his breath about the waste of space and how I was pissing away our future on supplies I'd never use. "I'm tired of seeing this junk in the garage, Clara," he yelled from the kitchen. "You're wasting money. We should be saving for a new car. Stop acting like you're some big-shot entrepreneur." I just kept my head down, moving the boxes myself, because he refused to lift a finger to help me. I was exhausted, my muscles aching from the physical labor, but I knew something he didn't. The national chain had a standard net 7 payment term for their first-time sellers. I checked my email every hour, waiting for the confirmation. Then, while I was standing in the garage, my phone buzzed with a notification from my new bank app. I felt a rush of heat wash over me as I read the text. It was a payment notification. Invoice number 001 had been paid in full. The money wasn't a dream anymore. It was an official record in a bank account Julian couldn't touch. I sat on an unopened crate of wax in the garage, staring at the screen of my phone in utter silence. $42,000. It was more money than I had ever seen at once in my entire life. It was nearly a year's salary at my day job, and it had been earned through my own vision and hard work. The feeling of validation was so intense it almost made me dizzy. I was no longer a housewife with a hobby. I was a woman with a profitable, growing company. My hands shook as I realized the power this gave me. But the moment of peace was shattered when the garage door creaked open. Julian bursts in, looking absolutely furious. He had just tried to pull his car into the driveway and was blocked by a third delivery of shipping boxes. "Why are there boxes everywhere? You're cluttering my house and making the neighbors think we're running a junkyard," he screamed, his face turning a deep shade of red. He kicked one of the boxes, unaware that it contained expensive fragrance oils. "I'm sick of this, Clara. You're taking over the whole property with this nonsense. It ends now." He looked like a man who thought he still had total control, unaware that the woman sitting in front of him was now financially independent and completely done with his arrogance. The argument moved from the garage into the house, escalating into the most vicious fight of our marriage. Julian stood in the kitchen, his voice booming as he mocked me for chasing a fantasy. He called me delusional, told me my candles were mediocre, and insisted that the boutique sale was just a pity buy from a neighbor. "You're a secretary, Clara. That's what you're good at. Stop trying to be something you're not," he spat, his eyes full of contempt. I stood my ground, my voice trembling but firm as I insisted that this was my dream and I was going to see it through. "This isn't a fantasy, Julian. It's happening whether you like it or not," I told him. He let out a harsh, jagged laugh and grabbed his jacket. "Fine. Waste your time. But when it inevitably flops and you've spent every cent we have, don't come crying to me for help. I won't bail you out of your stupidity." He slammed the front door so hard the glass rattled in the frames. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, tears streaming down my face, but I wasn't crying because I was sad. I was crying because I finally realized that the man I married was the biggest obstacle to my success. Just then, I got a text from my neighbor, Maria, who had heard the whole thing. Maria was a retired schoolteacher with a heart of gold and a garage that was twice the size of ours. She knocked on my door 10 minutes after Julian left, holding a tray of cookies and a determined look in her eyes. "I heard him, honey," she said softly. "You can't work in an environment like that. My garage is empty and climate-controlled. Use it as your workspace. Get your business out of his house, so he can't hold it over your head." I was overwhelmed by her kindness. That night, with Maria's help, I moved the most important supplies into her garage. It felt like a covert operation, moving boxes under the moonlight while Julian was out drinking with his friends. The next morning, Maria came by the garage with a friend of hers named Elena. Elena owned a high-end day spa in the city and was looking for a signature scent for her private label. She smelled my Coastal Rain blend and was instantly hooked. "This is exactly the level of sophistication I've been looking for," Elena said, pulling out her checkbook. She ordered 200 custom-labeled candles for her gift boxes right there on the spot. I then realized that Julian was the only person in the world who thought I wasn't good enough. I had an ally now. With Maria's garage as my new headquarters, I threw myself into the work with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. I worked my day job, then spent 6 to 7 hours every evening pouring wax, blending scents, and packing orders. My hands were constantly covered in wax, and my fingers were blistered, but I didn't care. And it was unstoppable. I was fulfilling the national chain's order while simultaneously managing the new spa contract and dozens of smaller online sales. I was barely sleeping 4 hours a night, my body fueled by caffeine and pure, cold determination. Julian continued to ignore me at home, acting as if I didn't exist, which actually made it easier to focus. He thought I was failing in silence. He had no idea that my online shop had just been featured in a small business newsletter. That night, as I sat at Maria's workbench, I tried to log into my website to check the inventory. The page wouldn't load. I panicked, thinking I'd been hacked. I checked the back-end analytics and my jaw dropped. I had received over 1,000 orders in the last 6 hours alone. The server had crashed under the sheer volume of traffic. I was drowning in success, and I was doing it all by myself, far away from Julian's watchful, judging eyes. The atmosphere at home was freezing. Julian had stopped speaking to me entirely, giving me a cold shoulder that would have broken me a year ago. Now, it was just a minor annoyance. He spent his evenings at local bars, and I knew from social media that he was telling everyone he was the patient husband dealing with a wife's midlife crisis. He bragged to his friends about how he paid all the bills while I played with wax. I just let him talk. I was too busy coordinating a massive logistics operation for Maria's garage. I had hired 2 local college students to help me with the packing and shipping because the volume was becoming unmanageable. One afternoon, while I was at my day job, I received an urgent email from the national home goods chain. They were so impressed with the initial sell-through rates of my candles that they wanted me to attend their annual vendor conference in Chicago. They wanted to feature Aura Vibe Scents as their Rising Partner of the Year. It was a huge honor that would put me in front of hundreds of international buyers. The email ended with an invitation to a private dinner with their executive board. I realized I couldn't hide this much longer, but I wasn't ready to let Julian in on the secret yet. I knew Julian would never let me go to Chicago if he knew the truth, so I played a dangerous game. I told him I was going to visit my sister, Diana, for a long weekend to clear my head after our recent fights. He didn't even look up from his phone, just grunting a whatever as I packed my bags. I didn't take a duffel bag. I took a professional suitcase filled with my best blazer and hundreds of sample candles. The conference was a whirlwind of lights, handshakes, and business cards. When I stood at my booth, I wasn't a kitchen CEO, I was a founder. The buyers from the national chain treated me like a celebrity. Within 3 hours of the floor opening, my booth had sold out of every single sample I brought. Buyers from 3 other major retailers approached me, asking for my wholesale pricing list. By the second day, a regional distributor offered me a supply deal that would put Aura Vibe in 50 boutique stores across the Midwest. I was signing contracts on napkins and official letterheads. I felt like I was flying, but the high didn't last long. On my flight back, I turned on my phone to find 5 missed calls from Julian and a text that made my stomach drop into my shoes. The text from Julian was short and ominous. "We need to talk. Now." I walked through the front door of our house, exhausted but still buzzing from the Chicago success. Julian was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open, his face a mask of cold fury. "I was checking our joint tax filing status online," he began, his voice low and dangerous. "And I saw something strange. I saw a massive transfer notification in our records for something called Aura Vibe Scents." "What is this, Clara?" He turned the laptop screen toward me. It was a record of a recent transfer I had made from my business account to our joint account to pay for a large repair on our furnace, a repair I had paid for entirely on my own to be helpful. I hadn't realized the bank would list the business name so clearly on the joint statement. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had been caught, but not for doing something wrong, for being successful. Before I could explain, my phone buzzed in my hand with a new bank alert. A second massive deposit from the Chicago distributors had just landed. The amount was $65,000. Julian's eyes widened as the notification popped up on my locked screen, which was resting on the table between us. Julian stared at the phone screen, his mouth literally hanging open in shock. The silence in the kitchen was absolute for a long, heavy minute. What is that?" he stammered, his mocking tone replaced by sheer confusion. I reached out, picked up my phone, and looked him dead in the eye. "That's my business, Julian. Remember the one you said wouldn't work? The one that smelled like cheap soap?" I felt a surge of cold, hard triumph as the reality started to sink into his head. He looked back at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. He laughed nervously, a high-pitched sound that lacked any of its former confidence. That's a lot of money, Clara." "Wow. I had no idea you were actually doing something real." He stood up and tried to put a hand on my shoulder, his voice suddenly becoming supportive and sweet in a way that felt entirely fake. "That's cute, honey. Really? We could really use that for the down payment on the cabin I wanted. I'm glad my advice finally paid off. But you know the money's ours, right? I mean, I supported you while you were playing around with this." I stepped back, avoiding his touch, my expression turning to stone. I felt a wave of disgust wash over me at his immediate attempt to claim my hard work. Actually, Julian, no, I said, my voice as sharp as a razor. The business is legally mine. I filed as a sole member LLC. It's registered under my name, and my name only. You never signed a single document. You never helped with a single pour. In fact, you did everything in your power to make me fail. His face went from pale to ghostly white. The supportive husband, mask slipped, revealing the panicked greed underneath. You can't do that. We're married. Everything is joint, he shouted, his voice rising in pitch. I didn't stay to argue with a man who only valued me for my bank account. I went into my home office and locked the door, but I could hear him walking in the hallway like a caged animal. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed up watching the security camera I had installed in my office. I watched as Julian waited until he thought I was asleep, then snuck into the room using a spare key he'd hidden. He started snooping through my desk, frantically printing out my invoices and bank statements behind my back. He was no longer my husband. He was an auditor looking for a payday. The next morning, I didn't confront Julian about the midnight snooping. I wanted to see how far his desperation would take him. I went to the warehouse I had recently leased to handle the Chicago orders, but I kept my phone close. Around noon, I received an alert from my business credit monitoring service. Someone had attempted to open a high-limit business credit card under the name Aura Sense LLC, using my tax ID and Julian's personal email address as the contact. My blood ran cold. He wasn't just looking for money. He was trying to hijack my company's credit to fund his own lifestyle. He was trying to bind my business to his personal debts. I didn't hesitate for a second. I called the bank immediately, reported the attempted identity misuse, and put a fraud alert on my business and personal files. Then I went to our joint bank branch. I withdrew every penny that I had personally contributed over the last 5 years and moved it to my private account. I left him with exactly what he had put in. Nothing more. I froze our shared accounts and revoked his access to the digital banking app. I was cutting the financial ties before he could drag me down into his greed. When I got home that evening, the house felt like a powder keg. Julian was standing in the living room, his face contorted with rage. He had tried to use his card at the gas station, and it had been declined. He also received a call from the fraud department at the credit card company. "You humiliated me," he screamed, throwing a vase against the wall. It shattered into 1,000 pieces, missing me by inches. "You made me look like a joke at the bank. My friends are asking why my wife is suddenly hiding money. They're asking if you make more than me, and I look like a fool." He was vibrating with a toxic mix of wounded ego and desperate greed. I stood my ground, refusing to flinch at his tantrum. The emotional abuse that used to make me cry now only made me feel a deep, cold sense of resolve. "I don't care how you look to your friends, Julian," I said, my voice quiet and steady. "You tried to commit fraud against my company." He stepped toward me, looming over me in a desperate attempt to intimidate. "Answer the question, Clara. Do you really think you're the breadwinner now?" I looked him right in the eye. "I don't think so, Julian. I know it. I make significantly more than you." The silence that followed my confession was heavy, but it was broken by a knock at the door. A professional courier was standing there with a large, flat package. I signed for it and brought it into the kitchen. Julian watched, his breath ragged, as I opened it. Inside was a beautifully framed certificate from the national retailer I had met in Chicago. It was the Vendor Excellence Award for Aura Sense, honoring us for outstanding sales performance and innovation. But that wasn't what caught Julian's eye. Tucked into the corner of the frame was the accompanying final invitation for the regional distribution contract. The total amount, printed in bold black ink, was $187,000. Julian's jaw literally dropped. He reached out and grabbed the paper, his hands trembling as he stared at the numbers. The reality of my success was no longer something he could scoff at or ignore. It was a 6-figure reality that made his own salary look like a hobby. "Wait, they actually paid you this much?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "For candles, $187,000? The look of pure, unadulterated greed slowly replaced the shock on his face as he realized exactly how much money he was about to lose if I left. In an instant, Julian's entire demeanor shifted. The screaming and the breaking of vases stopped abruptly. He suddenly became the perfect husband again, a transformation so fast it was sickening. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and breakfast being prepared. Julian was in the kitchen, wearing an apron and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, his voice dripping with a fake sweetness that made my stomach churn. "I thought you could use a break. I've been thinking, and I really want to support your vision. I could even quit my job and help you manage the logistics. We could be a power couple." He complimented my work, told me how inspired he was by my drive, and even offered to rub my shoulders. I saw right through it. He wasn't in love with me. He was in love with the invoice. He sat down across from me at the breakfast table, leaning in with a hungry look in his eyes. "So, when's the next big payment coming in?" I was looking at some investment properties we could buy with that $187,000. I smiled at him, a knowing, dangerous smile. "Soon, Julian. Very soon." While I played along with Julian's sudden transformation, I was moving behind the scenes with surgical precision. I told him I was busy with administrative tasks, but in reality, I was meeting with a high-powered divorce attorney across town. I sat in a sleek office, showing the lawyer the records of Julian's attempted credit fraud and his history of emotional abuse. The attorney was impressed by my documentation. "You've done a great job protecting the LLC, Clara," he said, looking over the filing. "But we need to move fast. Marital assets can get messy. Move your personal funds into a separate trust immediately. Protect the business accounts with two-factor authentication that only you can access." I followed every single instruction. I was setting a trap for a man who thought he was finally going to live off my hard work. I went home and acted like the happy wife, even letting him take me out to dinner. He spent the entire night talking about the new life we were going to have with my money, oblivious to the fact that I was already gone. I just nodded and ordered the most expensive steak on the menu. My attorney's final text read, "The papers are ready. Serve him tomorrow." The next morning, while Julian was at work, the job he was already planning to quit, I moved. With Maria and a professional moving crew, I emptied my personal belongings from the house. I transferred the last of my assets into the protected LLC accounts and moved into a temporary luxury apartment near my warehouse. I left a single manila envelope on the kitchen table where my candles used to sit. By the time Julian got home, I was long gone. My phone started exploding with texts and calls. At first, they were sweet. "Clara? Where are you? Why is the house so quiet?" Then they became desperate. "I see the envelope. You're making a mistake. I'll support you now. We're a team." Then finally they became threatening. He sent a photo of himself standing outside my warehouse, his face red with fury in the reflection of the glass. He was banging on the doors, demanding that I come out and give him what he's owed. He was a man who had lost his meal ticket, and he was losing his mind. I sat in my new apartment, watching him through the security feed, feeling absolutely nothing but a sense of peace. I didn't hide in the warehouse. I walked out calmly, flanked by two private security guards I had hired to protect the facility. Julian was pacing by the gate, looking disheveled and frantic. When he saw me, he started screaming about how I stole his future and how he was going to take half of everything. I didn't say a word until I was standing a safe distance away. I held out a second manila envelope, the one containing the formal divorce papers, the evidence of his attempted credit fraud, and an official cease and desist order. "If you ever touch my business name again, Julian, or if you set foot on this property, you'll be seeing me in criminal court for identity theft," I said, my voice cold and unbreakable. "The house is yours, but the business and the $187,000 is mine. You laughed at the cheap soap, remember? Well, that soap just bought me my freedom." Julian's bravado finally cracked. He looked at the guards, then at the papers, and finally at the woman he no longer recognized. "You can't just walk away," he yelled, but his voice lacked any real power. I just turned my back on him and walked back into my empire, leaving him behind. 6 months later, Aura Vibe Sense was a household name. My candles were featured in the must-have section of 3 national magazines, and my revenue had tripled. I was no longer working out of a garage. I had a state-of-the-art manufacturing facility and a team of 20 employees who actually respected me. I was invited to appear on a popular morning talk show for a segment called Women Who Built Empires from Home. I sat on the brightly lit stage, looking professional and confident in a tailored suit. The host leaned in, smiling. "Clara, your story is so inspiring. You went from a kitchen hobby to a national brand in record time. What was the spark? What truly inspired you to start Auravibe?" I looked directly into the camera, knowing Julian was likely watching from whatever small apartment he'd landed in. I smiled a slow, satisfied smile. "Actually," I said, "I was inspired by being laughed at. Someone told me I'd never make a dime, and I decided to prove them wrong with every single invoice I sent." The crowd erupted in applause, and I felt the weight of years of mockery finally lift off my shoulders. "And you were free." I sat in my corner office on the top floor of my new headquarters, looking out at the city skyline as the sun began to set. My business manager walked in with a stack of new contracts and a fresh cup of coffee. I had achieved everything I ever wanted, and I had done it on my own terms. My phone buzzed on the desk, a message from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it and saw it was from Julian. "I saw the interview. I'm proud of you, Clara. I always knew you had it in you. Maybe we could grab a drink and catch up?" I didn't feel angry or even drunk. I just felt nothing. I didn't reply. I blocked the number and set the phone aside. I turned back to my manager and tapped the newest contract on the desk, a partnership with an international luxury hotel chain. "This looks perfect," I said. "Let's invite the new client." Because now, every time I send an invoice, it's a reminder that my worth was never his to mock, and my success was the only answer I ever needed to give. Auravibe wasn't just a candle company anymore. It was a testament to the power of a woman who refused to stay small. I was successfully free.